Did you really think I'd kill myself?
Here at Marvelous Videos, it's our humble opinion that Laurie Strode is the cream of the crop when it comes to Scream Queens. At least she's one of the longest surviving ones, and the dude she was trying to survive from was Michael frickin' Myers. She appeared in at least 7 installments of the franchise, a franchise that has multiple timelines and continuities. Still, there's the original Halloween's timeline, then Halloween 4 through 6 have their own timeline, then there's H2O, Rob Zombie did his thing with the Halloween movies, and finally, the final timeline where evil presumably ended and courage won. So in this video, we wanted to explore Laurie Strode's entire life across the different timelines in a comprehensive yet organized fashion. Fellow slasher fans, get your hockey masks out as we're about to... wait, sorry, that's a different slasher. Anyways, before we get too deep into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to the channel. It's a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Laurie's first encounter with Michael. Cynthia Myers was born in 1961 as the youngest of 3 children to Donald and Edith Myers. Her life took a turn for the macabre when she was only 2. One dark Halloween night, her 6-year-old brother Michael brutally killed their teenage sister Judith with a butcher knife. He was then confined to an institution, and Cynthia was too young to grasp the horror that had torn her family apart. At some point, her parents took her to visit Michael at Smith's Grove Sanitarium, though she barely remembers that encounter. Tragedy struck again when she lost both parents in a car crash in 1965, leaving her an orphan. She entered the foster system, where Morgan and Pamela Strode adopted her. They changed her name to Laurie, and the governor of Illinois sealed her birth records to hide her connection to the Myers family. Over time, Laurie forgot about her biological parents, her brother, and the grim night that stole her sister's life. By 1978, Laurie Strode was 17, attending Haddonfield High School. She was shy, studious, and preferred quiet evenings to the carefree partying that her friends Annie Brackett and Linda Vanderklok enjoyed. She believed her bookish approach to life drove boys away, so she rarely dated. On Halloween morning, her adoptive father asked her to drop off a set of keys at the old Myers house. She had no idea that she'd been born there or that her brother's crimes had taken place inside those walls. That afternoon, while in her literature class, Laurie noticed a man lurking across the street. She shrugged it off but felt a creeping paranoia. Later, when she walked home with Annie and Linda, she saw the same man peering around a hedge. Annie marched over to check, found nothing, and teased Laurie for being jumpy. At home, Laurie glimpsed that shape again in her neighbor's backyard behind a clothesline. After a quick shower, Linda rushed into Laurie's house, saying a man had stalked her too. Laurie suspected that they shared the same pursuer and felt a rising sense of dread. She left with Annie to pick up babysitting duties that night, and on the way, heard that someone stole a Halloween mask, a rope, and some knives from Nichols' hardware store. Laurie mused about a boy named Bennett Tramer that she liked, and Annie decided to intervene, calling him on Laurie's behalf. Laurie begged her to call back and cancel the arrangement, mortified at Annie's meddling. They parted ways, each heading to separate babysitting jobs. Laurie settled in at the Doyle house, looking after little Tommy Doyle. She brought a jack-o'-lantern for fun, read comics with Tommy, and watched scary movies. Meanwhile, Annie came by with Lindsay Wallace, the girl she was babysitting. Annie wanted Laurie to watch Lindsay for a couple of hours so she could meet her boyfriend, Paul. Laurie disliked the idea, but accepted when Annie threatened to sabotage her potential date with Bennett. Laurie had no clue that Michael Myers, her long-lost brother, had returned to Haddonfield after escaping Smith's Grove. He spied on her at school and trailed her through the neighborhood. As Laurie caught up with her young charges, Michael was out in the darkness, eliminating anyone who crossed his path. He caught up with Annie first, strangling her in a car, then Linda and her boyfriend Bob in the Wallace house. Laurie grew uneasy when neither friend checked back in. She walked to the Wallace home and discovered Annie's body on a bed with Judith Myers' tombstone displayed next to her. She found Linda and Bob's corpses hidden in the other rooms. Then Michael appeared, wearing his pale, expressionless mask. He slashed at Laurie's arm. She toppled over the upstairs railing and crashed onto the living room floor. She limped away, terrified. Michael was unstoppable though, so she raced back to the Doyle house and ordered Tommy to let her in. She locked the doors behind her, telling Tommy and Lindsay to hide. That moment gave her a shred of hope, but Michael soon crept in through a window. She fought him off with a knitting needle to the neck, then ran upstairs. Michael cornered her in a bedroom closet, stabbing through the door. Laurie fashioned a makeshift weapon from a coat hanger and jabbed it into Michael's eye. He dropped his knife and she used it to stab him in the gut. Laurie collapsed outside the closet before telling the children to run for help. To her horror, Michael rose behind her and began to strangle her. She yanked off his mask and saw his face for the first time, and that brief distraction let Dr. Samuel Loomis, Michael's psychiatrist, bust into the house and unload his revolver on Michael. Loomis fired 6 shots and Michael fell over the balcony behind him. When Loomis checked the yard below, however, Michael was gone. Laurie learns the truth about her brother. An ambulance whisked Laurie away to Haddonfield Memorial Hospital where staffers sedated her. A young EMT named Jimmy tried comforting her, but she felt unsafe. She heard the killer's name for the first time, Michael Myers. Believing him dead, she relaxed slightly, only to learn from Jimmy that the actual charred body recovered was not Michael's, but someone else's. Michael had survived once more and tracked her to the hospital. He murdered every nurse, doctor, and guard on duty, leaving only Laurie among the living. She slipped out of her room and roamed the silent corridors. She hid in a car with Jimmy, but he passed out from a head injury. Laurie, half sedated, couldn't start the car, so she stumbled back inside, discovering Dr. Loomis had arrived with his colleague, Marion Chambers, and a state marshal. They believed Michael was dead, but Laurie screamed that he was still alive. Michael soon proved her right. He wounded Loomis, which left Laurie to face her brother alone in an exam room. Loomis tossed her a pistol, locked Michael out, but Michael burst in anyway. Laurie fired 2 shots, blowing out Michael's eyes. He thrashed around blindly, slicing at air with his knife. Loomis, bleeding badly, twisted open canisters of ether. Laurie did the same. They slid out while Loomis flicked his lighter. The resulting explosion filled the corridor with flame. Michael lurched out, engulfed in fire, and then dropped to the ground. A dazed Laurie ended up in an ambulance, traumatized but alive. In the aftermath, she finally knew her attacker's name, Michael Myers. She didn't yet recall that she was once Cynthia Myers, his baby sister. The memories of her adoption and the sealed record had kept that truth buried, but she sensed she shared some dark link to the boogeyman. People labeled him unstoppable, the ultimate evil. Laurie bore the scars of her brushes with him, physical wounds and haunting nightmares. In the years ahead, she would learn she was indeed the lost Myers child, put up for adoption after her parents died. She would realize she once visited a young Michael at Smith's Grove and that he never forgot. For now, all she could do was sit in that ambulance, battered from the night's horrors, half aware that Michael had escaped Loomis's bullets more than once and might rise again. She stared at the horizon, dreading the possibility that her brother's madness was far from over. Even though she survived 2 nights of terror, a part of her suspected that Michael Myers, and the curse he carried, would someday return. 4 to 6 continuity. Laurie Strode went through 2 drastically different paths after that horrifying night in 1978 when Michael Myers hunted her across Haddonfield. One version of her story revolves around a daughter named Jamie Lloyd in the so-called 4 to 6 continuity, while another has her adopting the name Carrie Tate and moving to California in what fans call the H2O timeline. Both timelines start with the same horrific spark, Michael's rampage on Halloween night, but they splinter off into 2 separate fates for Laurie. In the 4 to 6 continuity, Laurie eventually married a man named Mr. Lloyd sometime after 1978 and gave birth to a daughter named Jamie in 1980. On November 30th, 1987, she and Mr. Lloyd died in an unspecified accident, and her orphaned daughter ended up in the care of Richard and Darlene Carruthers. Laurie had actually babysat their own daughter Rachel back in her high school days, so they were no strangers to the Strode family. Jamie had no memory of her mother beyond a shoebox full of pictures. Among those photos was one of Laurie taken on Halloween 1978, clearly linking the child to the legacy of Michael Myers. When Myers rose again in 1988, he used those images to confirm Jamie's identity, Laurie Strode's daughter, and thus his next target. Later, in 1995, a branch of Laurie's adoptive relatives, the Strode clan, moved into the old Myers house. Their names were John, Deborah, Cara, Tim, and Danny. The record is fuzzy on how they felt about Laurie. Maybe they held no animosity, but they certainly didn't mention her much. Laurie had no direct role in these events, yet the presence of the Strodes in the Myers home added yet another chapter to the family's complicated history. Now, in the H2O timeline, Laurie's story diverges completely. She faked her death sometime after 1978, changed her name to Carrie Tate, and ran off to California. She eventually landed in Summer Glen, where she became the head mistress of Hillcrest Academy, a small private prep school. She had a son, John, in 1981 with a man she once married. However, the relationship ended badly. She raised John on her own, all the while haunted by the memories of Michael and drowning her trauma in booze and pills. Although Laurie carried on a somewhat functional life at Hillcrest, dating the school's guidance counselor Will Brennan, she never really let go of her old fear. Each Halloween made her paranoid that Michael would surface to finish what he had started. On October 31st, 1998, exactly 20 years after she first faced her murderous brother, her dread proved correct. Michael showed up to track her down again. Laurie had been living under an alias for 2 decades, convinced that Michael might still be alive despite the official story that he'd burned to death years earlier. She'd taught her son John to handle her quirks, but John found her overbearing. He wanted to take a class trip to Yosemite, but Laurie refused. She eventually caved, though John and his friends secretly stayed behind at Hillcrest anyways, believing Michael was long dead. When Michael arrived, he began picking off John's friends one by one. Laurie, after discovering the truth that John had lied about Yosemite, raced to his rescue. She found John and his girlfriend Molly cowering from Michael. Laurie got them to relative safety, then decided that she had to face Michael once and for all. She ushered the teenagers to the front gates, locked the grounds, smashed some emergency glass, and seized a fire axe. This confrontation ended with Laurie seemingly killing Michael, though she knew better than to trust that he was truly gone. Once the authorities arrived, Michael's body was zipped into a bag and loaded into an ambulance. Laurie hijacked the vehicle, certain her brother was still alive inside. She drove off into the night with Michael in the back, eventually slamming on the brakes and sending him flying through the windshield. She pinned him to a tree with the crashing van, then took the fire axe, walked over, and chopped off his head with one mighty swing. She believed that at last she had rid the world of the evil of Michael Myers. But that's not the end of Laurie's twisted tale in some fan expansions. One version suggests Laurie sank into madness not long after. This story claims that she started wearing her brother's mask, prodded on by Dr. Terrence Wynn, the same man involved in the Thorn conspiracy. On Halloween 2001, she was an inmate at Smith's Grove Sanitarium, apparently succumbing to the same evil that drove Michael. She slipped out, visited the graves of her friends Annie, Linda, and Bob, dug up their bodies, and staged them at the Wallace house for Lindsay Wallace to find. She then lurked in the shadows like Michael once did, waiting for Tommy Doyle and Lindsay to discover her gruesome display. When Tommy and Lindsay arrived, she stabbed Tommy in the chest, trying to kill Lindsay as well, but Lindsay ran to the old Myers place. Laurie stalked her and found her in Judith's bedroom, combing her hair like a teenage Judith once had. Lindsay tried to reason with who she believed was Michael, saying that Judith and Laurie were both dead. She reached for Laurie's knife, but Laurie hurled Lindsay against the glass. Laurie might have killed Lindsay right there if Lindsay hadn't stabbed her in the eye with a shard of broken glass. Laurie was shot by Tommy's gun too, but she still tackled Tommy through a second-floor window, stabbing him in the neck. Lindsay watched it all in horror. Laurie, revealed as the masked assailant, wound up back in Smith's Grove catatonic. 4 weeks later, Lindsay came to see her, only to find Laurie unresponsive, apparently locked in the same kind of silent trance that once haunted Michael. H2O continuity. Meanwhile, a few expansions of the H2O timeline say that the authorities never found Michael's body after he supposedly burned years earlier. Laurie recognized that the entire town didn't believe her. She pushed away her adoptive parents, Morgan and Pamela Strode, feeling betrayed by their secrecy about her connection to the Myers name. She befriended a classmate named Sally Winters, another survivor of that fateful 1978 horror. They spent time together, smoked weed, and bonded over the losses they endured. Laurie felt guilt for the deaths of her friends and suspected her brother blamed her for something. She also found a diary that once belonged to Judith, implying Michael had intended to kill Laurie even before she was born. As she neared high school graduation, Laurie started using drugs and alcohol to cope with her trauma. On the day she actually graduated, she fainted upon seeing a glimpse of Michael in a parked car. That same night, she attended a class party and saw someone dressed up as a clown wielding a knife. Convinced it was Michael, she ran. She ended up outside Jimmy's house just in time to see Michael murder him. Furious and terrified, she tried rallying people to realize that Michael had returned, but the town would rather believe simpler explanations. Sometime after, Laurie decided that the only way out was to vanish. She faked her own death. Dr. Loomis and Marion Chambers were among the few who knew the truth, that Laurie had survived her supposed fatal accident, slipping away under a new identity. In 1998, as the head mistress of Hillcrest, she had to face her demon once more. She had a teenage son named John who saw her nightmares every day. Even though she tried to hold it together, she still downed pills, drank, and stared over her shoulder for a masked shape that might never come. Of course, Michael did eventually arrive. Laurie protected John and his girlfriend, slashed back at Michael, and believed she finished him off, but she refused to let the authorities handle it. She stole the ambulance he was in and personally beheaded the man she thought was her brother. She wanted finality. She wanted the nightmares to end. Some accounts suggest that she was correct. Others hint that it was the wrong man under that mask and Michael escaped once more. The record remains conflicting. In any case, the simplest version shows that Laurie overcame Michael in that final confrontation, delivering what felt like a permanent kill. H2O concluded with her triumphant slash of the axe, leaving fans hopeful that Laurie Strode had broken the Myers curse once and for all. But in deeper expansions, that triumph unravels, leading to a scenario where Laurie succumbs to madness herself. She either ends up locked away as a silent figure in Smith's Grove or isolates herself, haunted by the notion that Michael can never truly die. Whichever version you follow, the gist remains. Laurie Strode endured a lifetime of Michael Myers' shadow. Whether she had a daughter named Jamie or a teenage son named John, or whether she'd lost her mind or took on the Myers mask herself, she stayed bound to that memory of that Halloween night in 1978. She couldn't outrun it, no matter how many states she fled or how many times she changed her name. Sometimes she fought back with everything she had, forging a final stand on the outskirts of Haddonfield or in a California boarding school. Other times, she teetered on the brink of insanity, carrying the burden of surviving a monster that refused to die. In the end, Laurie's story shows how one night of horror can fracture a person's future into multiple possible outcomes. Somewhere out there, she's a fierce survivor with an axe in hand, and in another place, she's an inmate gazing out of a sanitarium window, as silent and haunted as her brother once was. Laurie Strode from Rob Zombie's Reboot. Laurie Strode's birth name was Angel Myers, a tiny baby born around 1990 to Deborah Myers and an unnamed father. He died soon after she came into the world, so Deborah struggled along with her family in a modest home in Haddonfield. Back then, Laurie had an older brother, Michael, 10 years old at the time, who loved her more than anything. He nicknamed her Boo, held her like a precious thing in his scrawny arms, and promised to protect her from the world. Then, one night, Michael's head went sideways. Something twisted in him, and he wound up slaughtering their teenage sister Judith, Judith's boyfriend Steve, and their mom's boyfriend Ronnie. The cops came, found Michael on the front steps with baby Laurie in his arms, and took him away to Smith's Grove Sanitarium, leaving a heartbroken Deborah to pick up the pieces. Michael's imprisonment should have ended the family tragedy, but instead it got worse. A year later, he murdered a nurse at Smith's Grove, sending Deborah Myers straight into despair. She couldn't handle that her beloved boy had become a monster, and one night, she put a gun to her head. Sheriff Lee Brackett responded to the 911 call and found her dead. Baby Laurie in a nearby crib crying for her mother. Fearing that little Angel Myers might grow up cursed by the Myers name, Brackett omitted her from his official paperwork and quietly dropped her off at a hospital in another county. 3 months later, a realtor named Mason Strode adopted her, gave her a new identity, Laurie Strode, and raised her as a normal Haddonfield girl. She had no memory of the horror that took her birth family. By the time she was 17, Laurie was living a normal teenager's life, or so she believed. She hung with pals Annie Brackett, the sheriff's daughter, and Linda Vanderklok, went to Haddonfield High, and babysat kids for extra cash. On Halloween night 2007, she had a gig watching Tommy Doyle, a lively boy with a weird fascination with monsters and boogeymen. Annie asked Laurie to watch Lindsay Wallace too so that she could see her boyfriend Paul. Laurie said yes, not realizing how that simple decision would collide with a deadly force from her forgotten past, because Michael Myers, recently escaped from Smith's Grove, had come home, fixated on finding his baby sister, Boo. Laurie ran around that evening, noticing this hulking figure in a blank, ghostly mask standing down the block. She felt uneasy, but dismissed it as her overactive imagination. Later, Annie dropped Lindsay off and teased Laurie about boys, mentioning Ben Tramer as a potential date. Laurie stayed at Tommy's, carved a jack-o'-lantern, and tried to have a cozy night. She had no clue that Michael was lurking in the darkness, slashing anyone who got between him and his sister. By midnight, Linda and Bob were dead. Annie lay bleeding in another house, and Laurie decided to check on them, worried by the eerie silence. She discovered the corpses strung up in gruesome poses and realized she'd wandered into a nightmare. Michael ambushed her, nearly butchered her with his massive knife, but she managed to flee back to the Doyle place. She pounded on the door, screaming for Tommy. Once inside, she locked the door, but that didn't stop Michael Myers. He broke in through a window, forcing Laurie upstairs while she hollered for the kids to hide. He pinned her against a wall, grabbing her so hard that she practically fainted from fear. On the floor, she found his discarded knife, or some improvised weapon, jabbed him in the shoulder, and limped away. 2 cops responded to a 911 call, but ended up stabbed by Michael. Laurie could barely think straight as she scrambled outside. He seized her, carried her back to the old Myers house, and that's when she woke up to the sight of Linda's body and Judith's tombstone. Michael tried to communicate something. He knelt, set his knife aside, showed her a tattered photograph of a little boy and a baby girl. Laurie stared, not understanding it was their baby picture. She used that moment to grab his knife and stab him, then fled out a window across some yards right into Dr. Loomis, Michael's former psychiatrist. Loomis shot Michael multiple times in the back, seemingly killing him. Laurie slumped, asking if it was the boogeyman. Loomis solemnly replied it probably was. Then Michael leapt back up and dragged Laurie away, determined to end things. Dr. Loomis tried talking him down and got mortally wounded for his trouble. Laurie found Loomis's handgun and climbed into the rafters. Michael reached her, tackled her through a rotted wall, and they both tumbled off the second floor, crashing outside. Laurie recovered first, seeing him groan on his back. She lifted the gun, pulled the trigger, click, no bullet. Another click, still empty. Michael rose and grabbed at her wrist. The next pull fired straight into his face. She howled with raw horror. She ended up in the hospital with a broken finger, cuts, and bruises. Physically, she'd live. Emotionally, she was wrecked. Her parents were dead, her best friends murdered, her illusions gone. Sheriff Brackett took pity on her and invited her to stay with him and Annie, who had survived although badly scarred. Over time, Laurie became moody and depressed, prone to nightmares that played out as though Michael was still coming for her. She had no idea that he was actually her brother. She'd only known that her name was Laurie Strode, that her adoptive father was a decent man, and that they tried to give her a normal life. But the truth was out there, waiting. 2 years passed and Laurie got therapy from Dr. Collier, plus heavy meds to calm her spiraling anxiety. The nightmares kept intensifying though, featuring images of Deborah Myers, her birth mother, as well as a young Michael. She took a job at Uncle Meat's Java Hole, hung with co-workers Maya Rockwell and Harley David, and kept her distance from Annie. Every time she glimpsed the scar tissue on Annie's face, she felt a surge of guilt. Halloween 2009 arrived, and Dr. Loomis had written a new book exposing more about Michael Myers, including the secret that Laurie was Michael's baby sister, originally named Angel. That knowledge shattered her. She tried to party away her confusion, got drunk at the Phantom Jam, and found out the hard way that Michael hadn't died. He came roaring back, killed her friend Maya, attacked Annie again, and forced Laurie to watch her die. Laurie flipped out and fled onto a dark highway, flagging down a driver who tried helping, only for Michael to murder him too. Michael dragged Laurie to a filthy shack in a field off Eagle Road. She had visions of Deborah and a phantom Michael ordering her to say, "I love you, Mommy." She tried resisting, but she couldn't outrun the hallucinations or Michael's grip. The police surrounded the shack, but Dr. Loomis marched in first, attempting to reason with his old patient. Michael killed Loomis, took a bullet from Sheriff Brackett, and got knocked onto a piece of farm equipment. Laurie, seeing her chance to end things, told Michael she loved him, grabbed his knife, and stabbed him repeatedly until he stopped moving. She emerged from the cabin wearing his dirty mask, cackling or crying or some combination of both. She dropped to her knees. She was spent, physically and mentally. Police lights flared, sirens blared, and the last we saw of Laurie was her sitting in a sanitarium with a blank stare, or, in the director's cut, possibly shot to death. One way or another, she'd fallen so far from that normal teenage babysitter life, undone by a family legacy she'd never asked for. Between the mania, the deaths, and the revelations, Laurie's entire existence turned into a nightmare. She started out as a sweet foster kid oblivious to her tragic heritage, but ended as either a catatonic soul in a locked ward or a casualty of the unstoppable Myers curse. Over a couple of Halloweens, she lost her innocence, her friends, and her sense of self to Michael's rampages. The townspeople had no clue that sweet little Laurie Strode was actually Angel Myers, baby sister of the boogeyman. That knowledge only made her spiral deeper, convinced that her fate was bound to his. Some say she got the final word by jamming that knife through Michael's chest, but the cost was her sanity. She'd stare off at imaginary horses and ghostly mothers, wearing Michael's mask as if she'd inherited more than just a secret name from him. Maybe she was a victim all along. Maybe she became just another Myers, doomed to keep the cycle of violence spinning. Either way, her story ended in blood and trauma, with a question mark looming over her final fate, a far cry from the carefree babysitter she once was. 2018 timeline. It's crazy how a single horror franchise can veer in all sorts of directions, but that's exactly what happened with Halloween and Laurie Strode's storyline, much to the chagrin of fans, to be honest. One minute, Laurie is killed in a quick mention of a car accident, and the next, she's resurrected for a new chapter, only to be killed again in yet another sequel, and then revived once more for the 2018 update. It's been a roller coaster for both the character and the fans who have followed her for decades. This version of events, the one centered on the 2018 film and its sequels, sets aside a bunch of earlier chapters and basically says, okay, none of that happened. This time, the new movie would ignore every single sequel after the 1978 original. The idea was to restore Michael to pure shape-like evil without the secret siblings motive from Halloween 2. This new approach basically created yet another timeline. One major reason for ignoring the sibling twist was that the 2018 writers felt it made Michael a bit less scary if we knew why he was hunting people, especially if it was a family vendetta. They preferred to keep him more mysterious and threatening. That's why in the 2018 trailer, we hear Laurie's granddaughter, Allison, correct a friend who mentions the rumor that Michael was Laurie's brother. He says, "No, that was something people made up," or something along those lines, which was basically the filmmakers telling us we're not doing that angle anymore. So the new timeline in this 2018 film goes like this. It's been 40 years since that horrible night in 1978. Michael Myers has spent all these decades locked up, and Laurie has spent them fighting the trauma of what he did. The movie starts with two true crime podcasters, Aaron and Dana, paying a visit to Smith's Grove Sanitarium, where Michael is set to be transferred to another facility. These two podcasters are hoping to rattle the hornet's nest by showing Michael his old mask, but he just stands there, not giving them the satisfaction of a response. They do, however, catch the attention of Dr. Sartain, Michael's psychiatrist, and an eager student of Dr. Loomis's old approach. Then, the podcasters head over to Laurie's heavily fortified home, which looks more like a survivalist's bunker than a cozy house. She has gates, cameras, weapons. She's basically turned her place into a fortress. Aaron and Dana want to interview her about her trauma, her 2 divorces, the messed up relationship she has with her daughter Karen, who got taken away by Child Protective Services when she was 12, and her unending fear of Michael Myers. Laurie agrees to talk for $3,000 but quickly ends the interview when they push her too far by suggesting she should have tried to get some face-to-face closure with Michael. That same night, Laurie hangs around to watch Michael being loaded onto a bus for his transfer. She's drinking, she's on edge, and she almost goes through with shooting herself because the thought of him going free terrifies her. As fate would have it, the bus crashes later that night. Michael escapes, kills a father and son who stumble upon the wreck, and steals their car and heads straight back toward Haddonfield. On the morning of Halloween, Michael snatches coveralls from a mechanic, kills a clerk at the gas station, and also murders the unfortunate podcasters. He retrieves his old mask from their car and heads on his merry path of destruction. Meanwhile, Laurie bursts into Karen's home to prove it's not secure, leading to another family fight. Karen's husband, Ray, is pretty clueless about the threat that's about to befall them, and Allison, Karen's daughter, is the only one who seems somewhat in tune with Grandma's warning. Michael, now fully suited up in that iconic mask and jumpsuit, prowls the streets of Haddonfield, killing people in shockingly quick succession. Laurie hears about an attack on her police radio, arrives at the scene, and teams up with Sheriff Hawkins to try and track Michael down. She nearly gets a shot on him, but doesn't manage to finish him off. Knowing Michael is on the loose, Laurie pulls Karen and Ray to her own home. They plan to wait for Allison to arrive while Hawkins and Dr. Sartain search for Michael. Hawkins and Sartain eventually find Allison instead, who has just escaped Michael. Hawkins hits Michael with his car, planning to put him down once and for all. Then, there's a nasty betrayal. Sartain stabs Hawkins, reveals that he's kind of obsessed with understanding Michael's psyche, and loads the killer, still alive, just injured, into the back seat with Allison. Sartain then grabs Michael's mask for himself in some twisted gesture of admiration. He wants to see if Michael will talk. Allison claims Michael spoke to her, hoping to lure Sartain into letting his guard down. Michael does wake up, smashes through the security barrier, hauls Sartain out of the car, and stomps his head into pulp. Allison flees. When Michael finally reaches Laurie's compound, he dispatches Ray in the front yard by strangling him. Laurie shoves Karen into a hidden basement room. Michael manages to break inside anyways, and he and Laurie have a brutal showdown. She is tossed off the balcony at one point in classic Halloween fashion. Allison arrives, but by the time she looks down from that balcony, Laurie's disappeared. Classic. Eventually, Allison finds her mom, and Michael discovers the entrance to the basement. Karen shoots him, Laurie reappears to shove him into the basement, and the trio trap him inside. Laurie then triggers a system of gas lines, tosses a flare onto them, and sets the entire house on fire with Michael locked inside. They hitch a ride in a passing truck, with Allison clutching Michael's knife. The fire seems to finish him for good, except, of course, it doesn't. Right after those events, Laurie is rushed to Haddonfield Memorial Hospital, losing a ton of blood from a stab wound. As firefighters race towards her burning house, she cries out for them to let it burn, but they naturally do their job and go in. Michael slaughters a bunch of them and escapes again, setting up the sequel, Halloween Kills. While Laurie undergoes emergency surgery, more murders happen across town. Tommy Doyle, one of the kids she once babysat, assembles a panicked crowd into a frenzy to chase Michael down. He's convinced that evil dies tonight. Laurie, stuck in the hospital, tries to tell everyone that she's responsible for Michael coming back and feels she needs to finish it. Karen tries to keep her from going out to fight, telling her that the authorities need to handle this. Laurie insists that's not enough, that the system failed and only she can fix it. Eventually, a chaotic mob at the hospital mistakes another escaped patient for Michael. Laurie and Karen do their best to stop this poor man from getting lynched by the crowd, but the situation spirals and he jumps to his death. That heartbreak leaves Laurie more convinced that Michael has twisted the whole town into violence and panic. Meanwhile, Karen tries to help other folks hunt down Michael, but it ends badly. Michael kills her along with a bunch of Haddonfield citizens that corner him. He's practically unstoppable at this point. Over in her hospital bed, Laurie fears Michael keeps growing stronger the more he kills. Hawkins, the deputy who survived Sartain's stabbing, tells her Michael isn't specifically after her, he was actually pushed in her direction by Sartain. Laurie has a hard time letting go of the idea that she's his prime target, but she learns from Hawkins' confession that maybe she'd spent years waiting for him and he might not have been waiting for her at all. But none of that matters now. Karen is gone and Laurie has to deal with that tragedy. 4 years pass after that massive bloodbath. Michael disappears. He just vanishes off the face of the earth, and Laurie decides it's time to rebuild. She moves into a new house with Allison, determined to embrace something like a normal life. No hidden traps, no electric fences, no heavy artillery. She even tries to learn how to bake again, though her first attempts end in burnt pies. Meanwhile, a young man named Corey Cunningham accidentally kills a kid he's babysitting on Halloween 2019. The boy's parents come home to a horrifying scene, and Corey becomes a local outcast, with many folks treating him like he's the next psycho in town. Laurie observes this incident from her car. She sees the aftermath and feels for Corey, but she also recognizes that Haddonfield is turning into a breeding ground of paranoia and blame. While writing her memoir, she crosses paths with Corey again when a group of teen bullies attacks him outside a gas station. She steps in to help, flashing a bit of that old edgy flair by offering to slash their tires. She then takes Corey to the hospital where Allison, now working there, bandages his hand. Allison feels an immediate draw to him, maybe seeing some part of herself in his alienation. Laurie tells Allison that she needs someone who can help her move on from her painful past. However, Laurie's attempt to spark a romance between Allison and Corey starts to backfire when Corey's inner darkness grows. He's harassed by bullies and blamed by nearly everyone in town for that child's death, so he slowly goes down a darker path. Things get even more disturbing when Corey runs into Michael Myers himself in a sewer. Michael stares into Corey's eyes and seems to see something twisted that resonates within him. After that, Corey basically turns into Michael's apprentice, complete with a spree of violence that includes more murders around Haddonfield. Laurie begins noticing Corey's shift in behavior. He's got this look in his eyes that reminds her of the way Michael glared at her in 1978. She visits Corey's mother, Joan, who's hostile and claims the town made Corey their new boogeyman now that Michael vanished. Laurie also talks to Jeremy's dad, the father of the boy Corey accidentally killed, who says Corey seemed like a different person when they crossed paths recently. Laurie grows convinced Michael has somehow infected Corey with that same evil. That's how she describes it later. One kind of evil that's like an infection, and if you don't recognize it, it can take over completely. Laurie tries to warn Corey off Allison, telling him that her granddaughter doesn't need someone this broken. Corey flips out, blaming Laurie for his issues and insisting that she introduced them in the first place. He accuses her of secretly wanting Michael to come back and basically calls her the town freak show. This friction throws a massive wedge between Laurie and Allison. Allison is fed up with the gossip that she's Laurie's trauma baby and hates the fact that everyone in town acts like it's Laurie's fault Michael returned in 2018. In a heated argument, she even tells Laurie that her parents' deaths and the deaths of her friends were still all part of the hysteria Laurie created. Allison storms out, leaving Laurie hurt and alone. Still, Laurie tries to call and apologize, but gets no answer. On Halloween 2022, Corey's violent streak reaches a breaking point. He plans to run off with Allison, but he's also set on ending Laurie. She realizes what's happening and waits at her house, setting up a scenario where it looks like she's about to kill herself. She calls in a fake suicide report, removes her glasses, and raises her gun to her head, but then turns and shoots Corey the second he steps into the room. He falls down the stairs, gravely injured. Laurie pulls him by his hair and taunts him for underestimating her. He laughs, knowing Allison is about to arrive, and stabs himself in the neck, blaming Laurie for his death as Allison walks in. Allison screams at her grandmother, believing she's just murdered Corey in cold blood, and she runs off. Laurie is devastated. While she sits alone in her kitchen, Michael finally shows up. He retrieves his mask from Corey's corpse and tries to leave, but a noise from the microwave distracts him, giving Laurie a chance to ambush him. They fight viciously, with Michael slamming her into the fridge and nearly shoving her hand into the garbage disposal. Laurie struggles but manages to stun him long enough to stab his hand to the table and drop a fridge on him to pin him down. She yanks off his mask and tells him she once thought he was the boogeyman, but realizes now he's just a pathetic man who's about to stop breathing. She slices his throat, and he still manages to grab her by the neck. pathetic. She tells him to go ahead and kill her, maybe resigning herself to the thought that this is how it ends. But Allison bursts back in, breaks Michael's arm, and saves her grandmother. With his wrist slit and his throat cut, Michael finally dies. The authorities arrive. Sheriff Barker authorizes a sort of ceremonial disposal, so Laurie, Allison, and all the remaining townspeople strap Michael's body to the top of a car and drive it to the local scrapyard. They feed his corpse into an industrial shredder, ensuring there's no chance of revival this time. Afterwards, Allison apologizes for not listening to Laurie about Corey and admits she realizes how that darkness took hold. Laurie finishes her memoir, writing that while she said goodbye to her own personal boogeyman, evil doesn't die. It just takes a new shape. She shares a soft moment with Hawkins, the deputy she's grown close to. They sit on her porch talking about cherry blossoms, a sign that maybe there is peace on the other side of all this terror. That covers the major events of the 2018 timeline, including Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends, but it's also important to understand Laurie Strode's personality through all these changes. She has always been someone who puts others first. In 1978, she shooed Tommy Doyle and Lindsay Wallace out of harm's way, telling them to run for help while she stayed behind to confront Michael. 40 years later, she guards her daughter Karen in a hidden basement room, fully prepared to face Michael alone when he smashes into her compound. That protective streak never goes away, even though it sometimes causes rifts in her family. As a mother, she trained Karen from a young age to shoot guns, set traps, and stay vigilant, but that level of paranoia made Karen feel caged and resentful, so by 2018, their relationship is seriously strained. Karen believes Laurie is obsessed with the idea of Michael coming back, and that obsession robbed her of a normal childhood. When Michael escapes in 2018, though, Karen reluctantly comes around and hides with Laurie, realizing maybe her mom wasn't so paranoid after all. Laurie takes a bullet to the stomach in the process, but she doesn't stop fighting. She stays in the hospital for much of Halloween Kills, convinced she needs to confront Michael because everyone else is either underestimating him or just fueling the hysteria in the wrong way. She believes Michael must die because as long as he's alive, fear will keep spreading through Haddonfield. Even so, she struggles with the personal realization that maybe he isn't actually coming after her specifically. She wrestles with that, especially after Deputy Hawkins confesses to her that Michael's new rampage was driven by Dr. Sartain, not by some burning desire for revenge against her. By the end of Halloween Kills, Laurie has lost her daughter, Karen. That grief weighs her down in the 4-year gap before Halloween Ends, though she tries to push through by living more openly and focusing on Allison's happiness. Her new approach to life is reminiscent of how Dr. Loomis used to behave. He was always the one telling folks how serious Michael is and how unstoppable the evil inside him might be. Now, Laurie is that elder figure who's been scarred by Michael and warns everyone not to underestimate him. Even so, she's friendlier with Hawkins. She shops at the local grocery store, she flirts a bit, she's trying to be more than just the crazy lady with a bunker. She still has glimpses of her old self, the bookish, shy teen who simply wanted to babysit kids and study. She even attempts normal grandmotherly tasks like baking a pumpkin pie for Allison, although with questionable results. Deep down, she never forgets her old friends, Annie and Linda, or her daughter Karen, whose picture remains on her phone's home screen. She's moved on enough to function, but she won't erase the people she lost. Laurie sees something of herself and her trauma in Corey Cunningham. The town labels him a killer, just as they once judged Laurie as a magnet for violence. Initially, she tries to help him stand up to bullies and sets him up with Allison, but it doesn't take long for her to sense a darker vibe in Corey. He has that 1,000-yard stare that Michael once had, an emptiness, or maybe a hidden fury, and it freaks Laurie out so much that she ends up warning him to stay away from Allison. That confrontation pushes Corey into blaming her for his suffering, saying she's the freak show while he's the psycho, and that she's basically the source of all the chaos in Haddonfield. He twists Allison against Laurie by convincing her that Laurie wants him dead. While we never see Laurie genuinely attempt murder, she definitely contemplates lethal action if it means protecting Allison. And in the end, Corey tries to stage a scenario where she looks like the killer, but he only manages to stab himself in the neck and cause a heartbreaking misunderstanding when Allison walks in on the scene. That final conflict with Corey leaves Laurie so shaken that she basically goes quiet, sits in her home, and waits for Michael. When he arrives, she unleashes decades of pent-up rage, stabbing him over and over until he's pinned beneath a refrigerator. She removes his mask, stares him in the eyes, and acknowledges he's just a man, not some supernatural beast, though he's done tremendous damage. She slits his throat and wrists, ending his reign of terror. Even as he bleeds out, he tries to strangle her, and there's this sense that part of her is willing to let him take her. It's like she's relieved or tired after all these years, but Allison saves her at the last second. That mother-daughter dynamic from 2018 is gone. Karen is dead now, but the grandmother-granddaughter bond is still there. Allison realizes she nearly let Corey tear them apart and now sees Laurie was right from the start. That led to a more hopeful ending with both Strode women free of Michael at last, and that's how we leave Laurie Strode, sitting on her porch with Frank Hawkins, maybe finally allowing herself to consider a life that isn't defined by traps or fear or grief or Michael Myers. She knows evil never really dies, it just changes shape, but at least for now, she's no longer its prisoner. She's done everything she can to protect her family and her town, even if that cost her friends, lovers, and some sense of sanity along the way. In this 2018 timeline and its sequels, Laurie got closure. Michael is truly gone, turned into shredded metal and flesh. She can breathe again, and if she wants to let a little romance blossom with Frank, or keep writing her memoir, or even light another pumpkin on Halloween night, she can do it in a world where, for once, she isn't looking over her shoulder for that iconic white mask. So, there you have it. That's the full scoop on Laurie Strode's journey in this final continuity. From her near disappearance in the earlier films, to H2O's retcon, to Resurrection's twist, and finally to the 2018 trilogy, which let her cut Michael's throat once and for all. She's gone from shy babysitter to traumatized fighter to battered warrior trying to find a trace of normalcy. And while Halloween as a franchise has had plenty of twists and odd directions, this storyline gave us a more in-depth look at Laurie's character than ever before, digging into her PTSD, survival instincts, and her unbreakable will to protect those she loves, even when they push her away. In the end, Laurie lived up to that unstoppable spirit she first showed in 1978, proving that evil might shapeshift, but so can courage. Also, very much like evil, courage never dies. That's all we got for you this time, but if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous night.